the dark star.
The universe is so vast, how could it be possible that only one sentient consciousness would exist? However, which ones really go the distance? Become eternal, not simply in the human multiversal zeitgeist, but in the multiversal alien zeitgeist. The eternal battle is between dark and light, warmth and cold, life and death. Any cold, heartless being has moments of kindness. Even the most virtuous have stains on their path. We are all uncomfortable, sometimes. And we are all comfortable when surrounded by comfortable company. But how many try and make others comfortable? How many take the time to breathe? Does the cold shivering being not envy the warmth by the fire? Will you share a seat so we can warm our feet? And how much longer until we can meet? He, she, them, it, they were legion. But they were one. Some days it rained, there must be a leak somewhere. But he also had a name for himself, because at his core he was a man. At least when he woke up tomorrow always had possibilities. And the radio had been strange recently. He called himself Michael most days, and he was born somewhere, sometime. Today was the day before Halloween, and he'd woken up listening to old records. Songs from his father. Songs from the distant past, the past long forgotten, songs of love lost, love found. The radio had become so tiring. The news was bad, war, death, loss. And he was tired. The records had a sweet smell when he pulled them from the old cardboard sheath. He loved the sound of the needle as it touched down on the dusty old records, something Alexa, his AI friend and sometimes joke teller, had not learned yet. The sound of a voice, breathed through living vocal cords into a diaphragm microphone and impressed on a wax record. But she did have jokes. What did the witch get when she wore shoes that were too tight? Alexa had asked this morning as he walked into the kitchen and asked her for a joke. After a brief pause, she said the punchline in her perfect deadpan, candy corns, and he laughed out loud as he filled up his coffee cup to pour to make his morning K-cup. While it brewed, he cleaned the dust off a record on the shelf and placed it on the spindle of the record player. He pressed the silver lever and the record dropped softly onto the spinning rubber platter and waited for the record to drop. Something had been gnawing at the back of his head. Something important. But he wasn't sure what it was or even if it was real. He'd read about something called the Mandela effect, where some people were convinced that Nelson Mandela had been killed in a jail cell and apartheid had lasted another 15 years. Even though everyone knew, he was released from prison and became president of South Africa. The old records in his collection had the lyrics to the songs printed on the sleeves in black and white, but they didn't match his memory or anyone he knew's memory. It was almost like the collective unconsciousness had collectively forgotten. But there it was printed on the original records. The strangest thing of all, the thing that really bothered him was that when the songs played on the oldies station it was always the new lyrics, as he had personally begun to call it, like the new math they were supposedly teaching at the schools now. The radio didn't seem to play the versions he'd found in his Italian grandfather's collection. He closed his eyes and listened to the music pour from the speakers as the old turntable spun, casting a sparkling glow on the ceiling from the late morning sun. He needed to get ready to go downtown for some shopping. He'd been dying to see if the record store had anything interesting. There had been a story on the news the night before about an asteroid or a comet, he wasn't sure which, and really what's the difference if it crashes into the world? The report had said it was bigger than the world's tallest building, but don't worry, the news reporter had breathlessly reported, it would zoom right past harmlessly, this time anyway. Apparently orbital dynamics get really complex with all the stuff spinning out there in space, and as someone had said on Twitter, the dinosaurs didn't have a space program, but even with their current technology the space agencies had said they hadn't seen it until it would have been much too late. Thankfully, this one would pass by harmlessly, but what about next time? He pressed the silver lever on the record player and the arm slowly went back into the stainless steel rest and the red indicator light went dark. He put his shoes on and headed out to the car to drive downtown. He wanted to take a look in the record store for anything interesting before picking up some groceries. The old record store owner in downtown Lee was named Stephen, and he maintained a great selection of vintage records. He always seemed to find just the right record for just the right time. It was uncanny, really. Kings Road Record Shop was a few doors up from an old New England-style drugstore and a thrift shop named The Great Gatsby. Yeah, the town had an artistic streak. The green, faded sign sat above a black, cracked door with a polished brass knob that creaked as it turned. There was noticeably no bell, just the smell of faded cardboard wafting over your face as you stepped past the threshold. The owner's beard had faded a little to gray, but there were still strong streaks of the glossy black it had once been. "Well, hello there, Michael," he drawled in an accent that hinted of the north of New England. He'd never gotten a straight answer as to where he was from, not that he was one to pry. Michael waved a gentle hello before quietly turning to the neatly organized shelves of records along the wall. There was a song he kept humming, but he just couldn't remember the name or the artist, and he'd feel like an idiot humming to the owner of King's Records a melody he wasn't even sure was a real song. Maybe it was something he'd heard in a dream, he thought as his fingers slid over the tops of the records stacked in rows on the shelf. Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, the Mamas and the Papas, Fats Domino. He spotted one of his favorites and slid the record sheath up to look at it. Dire Straits, on the front of the album, was a fuzzy picture of a girl standing in the shadows. He turned the album over and saw the faces of the band, the Knopfler brothers on the left and Pick Withers, a drummer to rival the great Charlie Watts, smiles like a man who knew he just made an incredible album. He could close his eyes and feel the sweet sultans of swing pour out of his mind speaker like the first time he'd heard it. He had a memory for songs like that. He glanced down the aisle as he slid the Dire Straits album back into the shelf and saw a ragged blue album poking out above the rest, almost calling him to look. As he slid the record out of the old plastic divider it was hiding behind, he saw it was an artist he had never heard of before. Dorothy Donegan, live. The front cover proclaimed with a shot of the artist standing up playing a honky-tonk piano, a hint of a smile rising up from her intense eyes and her hands ready to attack the keyboard below. He turned the record over to see a collage of black and white photos of the artist at work, an intense joyful look on her face in every single shot except one where it seemed the photographer had caught her by surprise. "God, she is stunning," he thought as he read the back cover. Here's Dorothy in all her madness and all her greatness, captured at a swinging session recorded late one night at the Embers on Manhattan's elegant East Side. Here's the unrestrained Miss D, with her fabulous style and exciting piano, sailing through a dozen well-swung standards. With Dorothy, it's difficult to say there's a pattern to anything, least of all her madness. But usually she'll take a tune, play it straight and easy, then, with a whoop and a wild grin at the crowd, take off like there's no tomorrow. And when Dorothy takes off, anything goes. Well, that was it, he thought. He was hooked. He headed up to the counter to pay for the record, feeling the same giddiness he had felt as a child when he'd find an interesting book at the library and would rush back home and fall into that magical world of imagination. He couldn't wait to hear a little of the Dorothy Donegan madness the back cover had hinted at. But first he had to get groceries, as his rumbling stomach reminded him. He headed out of the record store, softly closing the door behind himself, and he glanced up the street and saw the strangest thing. An older man was standing at the end of the road with a pair of comically large headphones on his head, headphones like he'd never in his life before seen. And he was furiously scribbling in a notebook. He'd seen a lot of strange people in Lee over the years, but as he walked, turned and headed towards Harry's supermarket, the image of the small man with the giant headphones and notebook stuck with him for some time.